imprisoned in Lockerbie. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News.
The British Grand Prix driver David Coulthard has escaped with minor injuries from a plane crash in France which killed his 2 pilots. It happened when the private jet in which he and his fiancée were travelling tried to make an emergency landing at Lyon airport.
Astonishingly, David Coulthard and his fiancée walked away from the wreckage almost unscathed. Their private Learjet was ripped apart in the crash, having burst into flames on impact. Both the pilot and co-pilot were killed. Eyewitnesses at Lyon airport say the twin-engined aircraft nosedived on approach as it was making an emergency landing.
The plane started to wobble suddenly. Then the wing touched the ground and it went over. The cockpit broke into 2 pieces. There was an explosion. Just after that, we saw one person get out. I think it was David Coulthard.
Coulthard's personal trainer also escaped without serious injury. Now investigators are trying to find out what caused the jet to crash. It had been flying from Farnborough in Hampshire to Nice when it was diverted to Lyon because of engine problems. Coulthard and his fiancée Heidi Wyszynski, seen here together at a race function, were on their way to their home in Monaco when the tragedy happened. They were treated at a nearby hospital which said they'd been allowed to leave after undergoing tests. It's 9 days since Coulthard won the British Grand Prix. Remarkably, the 29-year-old McLaren Mercedes Formula One driver is expected to drive in the Spanish Grand Prix this coming weekend. Tonight he issued a statement saying he was relieved that he and Heidi were unhurt. He said they were very lucky to walk away alive. He also expressed his deepest sympathy to the families of the 2 dead pilots. John McIntyre, BBC News.
This is BBC News, a reminder of the headlines. Reports from Manila say that 2 of the foreign hostages held by rebels in the southern Philippines have died after a gun battle with government troops. Supporters of Zimbabwe's President Mugabe have staged a show of strength as the Commonwealth puts more pressure on him to end the farm violence. And later in the programme, pride of the fleet, but the new multi-million-dollar Aurora is limping back to port just 18 hours into her maiden voyage. Time now for a quick look at the latest business news with Liz George in New York. Liz.
Hello. The markets in the US are twitchy with inflation fears as some key economic data shows that the economy is still growing. And it was that and the fact that AT&T cut its outlook for the year 2000, which led the markets lower. AT&T is the leading US long-distance telephone company in the US and a Dow component, and it led the Dow down early this morning. But it was this, together with figures for the US market for new homes, which posted its 2nd strongest monthly sales ever in March, showing signs of inflation, which led the Dow Jones down to close down 80 points at 10,731. And the Nasdaq closed down as well, down 172 points at 37.85. Elsewhere, the US President Bill Clinton has once again been lobbying for normalized trade relations with China. He was speaking at an insurance conference, saying that this really is the way forward.
China is going to get in the World Trade Organization, whether we vote to give them normal trading relations every year or not. And the deal we negotiated with them does not give them one bit of increased access to our markets, but gives us huge increased access to their markets. If you saw the deal, you would ask why they signed it. The reason they signed it is you can't get into the World Trade Organization unless you're willing to trade. So they have a more closed economy. They sell a lot of stuff to us. Our biggest trade deficit now usually is with them. And they have to open their markets. And we negotiated a very strong deal that will mean more jobs, more businesses, more investments for America.
Well, it was a much more positive day in Europe on the markets. In fact, in Paris, the stock exchange there hit a record. It finally closed up 142 points at 65.62. That's the CAC 40. In Frankfurt, the DAX closed up 141 points at 75.55, while in London, the FTSE closed up 46 points at 63.73. And that's all the business news from us here in New York.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Well, staying in the Americas, protesters on the Puerto Rican island of Vieques are preparing for a possible confrontation with US federal authorities. Around 70 people have occupied the island in protest at America's plans to restart military exercises there. 2 US naval ships, helicopters and FBI agents have now arrived in the area.
A handful of tents on Vieques Beach, this makeshift protest camp a thorn in the side of the US military. Much of the picturesque island is controlled by the US Navy, used for bombing practice, sometimes with live munitions. But a year ago, when a bungled bombing run here killed a Puerto Rican guard, protests began. The tents were put up to stop the training, and the protesters say they're not budging.
There is absolutely no intention on the part of anyone in any of the civil disobedience groups to resist violently in any way. Everyone is dedicated to peaceful civil disobedience.
2 US warships carrying specially trained federal agents, backed by around 1,000 Marines, are now in the waters off Vieques. The US government says it will remove the protesters to allow the Navy to resume training with dummy bombs.
Today, there is no alternative to the capabilities the Vieques offers the Atlantic Fleet for training.
On Vieques, the confrontation has stirred deep resentment of the American military presence. Supporters of Puerto Rican independence from the US are stoking the fires. If the protesters are forcibly removed from the island, Washington is likely to face an outpouring of Puerto Rican anger. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
There's still no sign of an end to the severe drought that's affecting vast areas of North and West India. One of the worst hit regions is Rajasthan, where farmers are losing their livestock, and the situation is now said to be desperate.
Many of their menfolk have gone to seek work elsewhere. These women have stayed behind to do battle with their bone-dry land. The desert has closed in. Here, over what was once a pond with abundant water. As this drought tightens its grip, it is the bone collectors who are being kept busier by the day. Cattle die of lack of water, hunger and disease. But because there are so many, even the carcasses are fetching less. This is happening in a state where livestock are vital to the economy. There were warnings that 2 disappointing monsoons would have this kind of impact. There's barely anything left for the animals to graze on. Ratnaram tends his dwindling flock of sheep. He's now lost nearly 200. This lamb died during the night.
We share our food with the animals, but they still die. And this is just the start of summer. Maybe all of them will die.
His wife prepares a meal. Like others, she says today they're living on bread alone. She's worried about malnutrition. There's now an influential ally who sees it as the drought's silent emergency.
The situation here can deteriorate dramatically if we don't pay much attention. The risk is that a large proportion of this population may suffer the consequences of this situation for the rest of their life.
A couple bring their cows into a cattle camp. Here, at least, there is free fodder. They've been set up as a short-term measure to try to stem the livestock losses. People here are used to toughing it out, to coping in extreme conditions. But the cumulative effects of this drought are taking their toll in many ways. And the fear here is very real that if the livestock deaths continue on this scale, the human population will become increasingly vulnerable too. Mike Aldridge, BBC News, Barmer District, Rajasthan.
A brand new super cruise liner, the Aurora, is limping back to port after she broke down just 18 hours into her maiden voyage. The ship cost $300 million and has 2,000 passengers on board. Refunds for the cancelled cruise will cost an estimated $10 million.
The contract was a massive coup. Now the Maya Werft shipyard finds itself at the centre of an inquiry into what caused Aurora's maiden voyage to become an embarrassing failure. When she left southern Germany last month, hundreds waved the 76,000-ton vessel on her way. During the subsequent sea trials, there was apparently no indication of the propulsion problems that had affected her sister ship Oriana. Those trials ended with a triumphant entrance at the start of the tall ships race and a lavish naming ceremony performed by the Princess Royal. After such a public launch, P&O now have 2 priorities: to establish the cause of the technical problem and to find a dry dock which can effect repairs in time for Aurora's second cruise. She's due to cast off in less than 2 weeks. Robert Hall, BBC News, Southampton.
Stock exchanges in London and Frankfurt are expected later today to announce an agreement to merge. It's being seen as the most significant step so far towards the creation of a pan-European stock exchange. The new London-Frankfurt exchange is expected to handle shares worth about $4,000 billion. London will become the headquarters of the new organisation. The merger comes a month after the French, Dutch and Belgian stock exchanges announced a merger. A 300-year-old violin is expected to sell for over $1 million when it's auctioned later this week in New York. The Stradivarius is not only valued for its rarity, but for its pure sound.
Antonio Stradivari's violins are the best known in the world. He crafted this instrument in 1700, at the beginning of his golden period. It will be the draw card when it goes under the hammer with hundreds of violins at Christie's auction house in New York. Strads are so sought after by music lovers because their sound is unsurpassed in sweetness. Celebrated violinist Adela Penna was all praise for the 300-year-old instrument.
There's nothing like it. It has elegance, it has the balance of all four strings. It has a roundness and projection, but at the same time it just has this tenderness.
Christie's are expecting the bidding to go above $1 million.
The first reason, I think, is that it survives in pretty extraordinary condition, considering that it is 300 years old this year. Also added to the fact that it's a 1700 instrument, which is the start of Antonio Stradivarius' golden period.
Since 1987, this Stradivarius has been in the possession of a professional musician whose father purchased it for her. But with $1 million price tag on it this time, it will elude the reach of most musicians. Justine Cole, BBC News.
A reminder of the main news. There are conflicting reports concerning the safety of the 21 hostages being held by rebels in the southern Philippines. 2 of them have been reportedly killed during a gun battle between government troops and their captors. This is BBC News.
Hello again. Well, over the last few days we've seen a lot of thundery activity through many parts of Europe, and today is going to be no different. High pressure though out towards the east means things are a bit more settled, and as we push into tomorrow, that high pressure area pushing further east, extending down towards southern parts of Italy, but we continue with the thundery weather out towards the west. So if you are travelling off to the near continent over the next couple of days, well, starting off in the south first of all, you may run into some thundery showers in Nice, where we're seeing highs of 17 degrees Celsius, but you will in Athens with 23, that's 73 Fahrenheit, but at least by tomorrow things should brighten up. For Northern Europe, well, again, we've got some mixtures of sunshine, some showers around. Berlin looking quite pleasant, 22 degrees Celsius today is 72 Fahrenheit, but in London, quite a cloudy day, and the cloud will be slow to clear. Generally, in eastern areas of the country and central and southern parts too, we're starting the day with a fair amount of cloud, some hill fog and misty conditions. Once again, west is best. We're seeing some lovely sunshine here, and through the course of the day it will brighten up too in eastern parts of Scotland. But we're always going to have the thicker cloud clinging to the southeast of England in particular, and that is likely to be thick enough from time to time to produce the odd spot of drizzle. So again, as a result of the cloud and indeed the wind coming from a chilly source, we are looking at temperatures between 11 and 13 degrees Celsius in the east. But pull away to the west, where we're seeing some sunshine and lighter winds with highs of 18 degrees Celsius in Wales at 64 Fahrenheit. That will feel very pleasant. Then for Thursday, we continue with the cloud in eastern areas, dry and bright after a cloudy start for many western parts, but the northwest of Scotland seeing thicker cloud with rain pushing into the northeast through the afternoon.
The elections round the country tomorrow will be the last barometer of public political opinion before the next general election. As vote counting begins for the Romsey by-election, the London Mayor and Assembly, and 152 English local councils, we'll bring you full live coverage. Join David Dimbleby for Vote 2000 from 11 p.m. tomorrow on BBC One and BBC News 24. For all the results throughout the night, you can count on the BBC. They say the age of the 9-to-5 job is over. You have to stay ahead of the game. You might find yourself pulled in all directions as the demands on your time have never been greater. Sometimes it's difficult to keep up with the world around you, but the importance of staying well informed never changes. So, whatever you do at the weekend, enjoy yourself and catch up with the week's news on 7 days. Saturday at 5:30, BBC News 24.
Hello, this is BBC News 24 with me, Clarence Mitchell. In a moment, all the sport with Simon Hill, but at 5:30, the headlines. 11 years on, and the trial of the Lockerbie bombing suspects is due to start in a few hours' time. Reports from Manila say that 2 of the Western hostages being held by rebels in the southern Philippines have died after a gun battle with government troops. And the Commonwealth Secretary-General is to go to Zimbabwe to voice his concerns over political violence and illegal land occupations. The trial of the 2 Libyans accused of causing the Lockerbie disaster starts in a few hours' time. The Scottish court is sitting specially at Camp Zeist in the Netherlands.
If you come in, you drive your car through this bit here.
Arriving at the first Scottish court ever to sit abroad, some American relatives of those who died on Flight 103. The trial is being held on a converted airbase 8 miles from Utrecht. For the families who've just arrived, it was a journey of remembrance.
This is my daughter. This is Theo Cohen. She was 20 years old when she was blown up over Lockerbie, Scotland, over 11 years ago. And that's the reason I'm here, and we're here for her, and we're here for J.P. Flynn, and we're here for...
The men accused of murdering Theodora Cohen and 269 other people were brought to the Scottish court under cover of darkness in April of last year. Under an extraordinary diplomatic arrangement, this small corner of the Netherlands is now guarded by heavily armed Scottish police officers. The 2 Libyans had left Tripoli a few hours earlier, apparently of their own free will. They look relaxed and confident as they set off for what turned out to be more than a year in prison awaiting trial. The Lockerbie bombing is said to have been carried out by 2 Libyan intelligence officers. Abdul Basit al-Magrahi on the left is said to have been head of security at Libyan Arab Airlines. Alamin Khalifa Fahima is said to have been the airline's manager in Malta. A new airport opened in Malta 8 years ago to cater for the tourist trade. But this terminal, now a freight depot, is where the prosecution allege that the 2 men put a bomb, concealed in a radio cassette recorder, into a suitcase packed with clothing. They're said to have put the suitcase on board an Air Malta flight bound for Frankfurt. Luggage tags showed its final destination as John F. Kennedy Airport, New York. But their plan was that the suitcase and all those on board Pan Am Flight 103 would never arrive. The prosecution say that at Frankfurt, the suitcase was transferred from an Air Malta flight onto a Pan Am Boeing 727. The Pan Am jet flew to London, where it landed at Heathrow. Passengers and luggage were transferred onto another Pan Am jet, a Boeing 747, Flight 103. With additional passengers who joined the flight in London, 103 took off for New York. But it never arrived. The plane suddenly exploded over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. The 2 accused men deny killing the 243 passengers, the 16 crew members, and the 11 men, women and children who lived at Sherwood Crescent in Lockerbie. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News.
There are conflicting reports this morning concerning the safety of the 21 hostages being held by rebels in the southern Philippines. 2 of them have been reportedly killed during a gun battle between government troops and their captors. Unconfirmed reports say 1 man died after being shot with a stray bullet, and a woman suffering from a medical condition died of a heart attack. However, a local official said all the foreign hostages were still alive. The rebels are holding the hostages on the island of Jolo. They were abducted more than a week ago from a diving resort in Malaysia. Meanwhile, there have also been unconfirmed reports that gunmen have offered to free another group of 27 Filipino hostages, including 22 children, if the Filipino military lifts an armed assault against the extremist Muslim guerrillas on the southern island of Basilan.
More than a week after the hostages were first abducted, reports from the area now say that 2 of them have died. A German special envoy said one, a woman, had died of a heart attack. The other, a man, had been hit by a stray bullet. The kidnappers' leader, calling himself Commander Robot, had been quoted by local television as announcing the deaths. But he didn't say whether the bullet had come from the hostage takers or the military, who've been trying to flush the rebels out of their island hideout. 1 soldier was killed and at least 4 wounded in earlier clashes. Officers said some of the kidnappers had also been hit. The hostage takers have been using local media to communicate with the outside world. Earlier, a man claiming to be one of the kidnappers had telephoned a local radio station. He threatened to have 2 of the hostages beheaded if the government didn't withdraw the troops surrounding them. The Philippines Defence Minister has said a withdrawal is out of the question. Alex Kruger, BBC News.
Well, earlier, our correspondent in Zamboanga in the southern Philippines, Matt Fry, gave me the latest details on the hostages' apparent deaths.
The Filipino military down here, although it will not confirm, oddly enough, that 2 foreigners died, you get confirmation in Manila, but not down here. It did confirm, however, that there were 2 separate firefights yesterday between the rebels and the army, one at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and one at about 4:25 in the afternoon. In both cases, the military say rebels tried to leave the area and break through the military cordon, which has been set up around the camp where the hostages are held. They came across soldiers, a firefight ensued, and the Filipino military is saying that there were casualties on both sides. They confirm 1 dead soldier and 5 wounded soldiers. However, again, we don't know exactly what the circumstances of the death of the hostages were, where the stray bullet came from, whether it came from the government side or the rebel side, at what stage this woman had a heart attack, or indeed, of course, the nationality of the dead hostages. Again, what we do know, according to the German envoy, is that all the Western envoys currently in Manila dealing with this crisis, ambassadors or special envoys from the various capitals, have been contacted by the Filipino Foreign Ministry.
Matt Fry. The United Nations Secretary-General has condemned the abduction of UN peacekeepers in Sierra Leone. Kofi Annan called the acts criminal and outrageous, and he blamed fighters of the Revolutionary United Front. The Security Council has been meeting in special session to discuss the kidnappings. Rebels are reportedly holding 12 Kenyan and Indian peacekeepers. They were seized in the north and east of the country over the last 2 days. A further 5 UN personnel are also unaccounted for. The Commonwealth Secretary-General Don McKinnon is to visit Zimbabwe this month to pass on concerns about the continuing political crisis. Hundreds of white-owned farms have been occupied by self-styled veterans of the country's civil war in the run-up to elections.
President Mugabe may be under growing international pressure to end the crisis here, but today he seemed as defiant as ever. And so did his supporters out on the farms they've invaded. These squatters on Forester Estates north of Harare have threatened to kill its manager if he dares to plant new crops. There's real concern now that land occupations like this one may mean Zimbabwe eventually runs out of food.
The President knows as well as all of us that destroying commercial agriculture without an evolutionary process of replacing it will lead to dire poverty for this country. And I hope for myself that it is not true, but I hope for the country particularly that it is not true, because this would be starvation on a very large scale.
Other white farmers are now so frightened that they'll only talk to us if we hide their identities. They want to stay in Zimbabwe, but have contingency plans to leave if they have to.
If it's life-threatening, then I think we'll have to move, because we've actually got no protection at all. We can't defend ourselves. The odds are too overwhelming. We are not in a position of strength at all. Our backs are firmly against the wall.
So far against the wall that one white farmer was even prepared to embrace the leader of the land invasions, anything to stop more attacks. And he praised the invaders as true war veterans, though many have never fought.
They are war veterans, the same as the British war veterans of the Second World War or the American war veterans. Do not humiliate these people and call them black squatters.
And the farmers have agreed to stop overt support for Zimbabwe's opposition. All along, that was the aim of the invasions. With elections now expected in June, the opposition are trying to mobilise with a series of rallies, but it's not easy against a backdrop of terror. Members of the opposition in Zimbabwe have been threatened, beaten up and murdered. Opposing President Mugabe is a dangerous business, and it takes real courage for these people just to turn out to a rally like this one. And the opposition have already said that whenever the election is, it'll be neither free nor fair. Ben Brown, BBC News, Zimbabwe.
The Formula One racing driver David Coulthard has survived a plane crash in France which killed the aircraft's 2 pilots. The private Learjet crashed while making an emergency landing at Lyon airport. Mr. Coulthard escaped through a window, then went back to rescue his fiancée and personal trainer.
This is the wreckage of the plane David Coulthard and his girlfriend walked away from almost unscathed. Their private Learjet practically torn in 2 after crash landing at Lyon. It had burst into flames on impact. Tragically, the pilot and co-pilot were killed when the jet nosedived as it was making an emergency landing. They'd been flying from Farnborough in Hampshire when they were diverted to Lyon after radioing that they were suffering from engine problems. Airport officials say the pilots would have died instantly.
The cockpit split in 2. There was an explosion. One person got out. I think it was David Coulthard. He immediately went back. 2 other people got out.
David Coulthard and his fiancée Heidi Winchelsky were en route to Nice before heading to their home in Monaco. They were taken to a nearby hospital along with their bodyguard, who was also unhurt. All 3 were later discharged. The plane's operators say an inquiry into the crash is already underway.
There will obviously be an investigation which is going to be run by the French authorities. A team from the British Air Accident Investigation Bureau has left for Lyon. And obviously NEA will be doing everything it possibly can to assist in the investigation.
David Coulthard won the British Grand Prix just over a week ago. Remarkably, he's expected to drive in the Spanish Grand Prix this coming weekend. The crash is undoubtedly an amazing escape for a man who's more used to putting his life on the line on the racetrack. Lucy Atherton, BBC News.
Tony Blair and his Irish counterpart, Bertie Ahern, have spent the day yesterday trying to get the Northern Ireland peace process moving again. They've been meeting with the province's political leaders at Downing Street, and afterwards there seemed to be little sign of progress, but all the sides agreed to hold more talks in Belfast this Thursday.
The 2 Prime Ministers are pushing hard on this one, but both Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair know that there have never been any guarantees at any time in this process. They called the main Northern Ireland parties to Downing Street to see if the deadlock can be broken. And a sign that perhaps more than they'd expected from the talks is that they've planned another round in Northern Ireland on Thursday. They wouldn't do that unless there was at least something to discuss. The real surprise was Sinn Féin. They were the first party to go into number 10 and the last to come out. The pressure had clearly been on them, yet again, on decommissioning.
It isn't a matter of pressure. We don't come to Downing Street to be pressurised. For all the things that we are, we're not people who bend to that type of thought.
They were 7 hours in number 10, not all the time with the Prime Ministers. The Ulster Unionists too had their meeting, and they obviously did not hear what they came to hear, that Republicans were about to move on the weapons issue.
But it really boils down to the question of, are they actually prepared to do anything? And they should tell us what they're prepared to do. The agreement sets out objectives. It sets out things to be achieved. We want to see that happen. But they need to act themselves in order to bring that about.
The Northern Ireland Secretary said the governments were travelling in hope, but they were determined too not to raise expectations on restoring devolution.
I think that the prospects for that
certainly no worse after the discussions we've had today. Indeed, if I were to make any judgment at all, I'd say that I was somewhat encouraged.
These talks seem to have been better for the process than had been expected, but it's a process that's been moribund for months. If there is progress, it's happening slowly. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Downing Street.
This is BBC News 24, still to come on this morning's programme.
Good evening, Pop Pickers.
Yes, it's a Lifetime Achievement Award for one of radio's most famous voices.
I love Sheffield Wednesday fans.
Just the Leicester City player, and I just want to do well for them.
I made it absolutely clear that I didn't want to leave Fulham.
Kevin Keegan has signed to coach the England football team.
Find out everything that's going on in football almost as soon as they do. bbc.co.uk/football.
It is almost exactly 6:15. The headlines. 11 years on, and the trial of the Lockerbie bombing suspects is due to start in a few hours' time. Reports from Manila say that 2 of the Western hostages being held by rebels in the southern Philippines have died following a gun battle between the rebels and government troops. And the Commonwealth Secretary-General is to go to Zimbabwe to voice concerns over political violence and illegal land occupations. But before all those stories, they'll be coming up very soon, we can have a quick look at the latest sports headlines with Simon Hill. Simon.
Hello again. Well, Arsenal have taken another huge step towards Champions League qualification by beating West Ham at Highbury. The Gunners left it late, though. Emmanuel Petit's last-minute strike earning a 2-1 victory. The Tyne Tees derby ended all square at the Riverside. Another late goal from Gianluca Festa making it Middlesbrough 2, Newcastle 2. So there's a look at the Premiership table. Arsenal now 3 points clear of Liverpool in second place. Gillingham have improved their chances of automatic promotion to the First Division. That's after a 4-1 win over Cardiff. Carla Saba grabbed a hat-trick to send Cardiff back down to Division 3. And in the race to come up from the Third Division, 2 goals from Brian Healy against Southend kept Torquay within sight of the playoffs. It finished 2-0 at Roots Hall. And in Scotland, Celtic secured a 1-0 win at Dundee United on the day that Gus Hiddink was again linked with the vacant managerial post at Parkhead. Mark Burchill scored the only goal after 9 minutes, but more misery for Aberdeen as the bottom side went down 2-1 at St Johnstone. Paul Kane with another last-minute winner. No British teams, of course, in the semi-finals of the Champions League, but plenty of interest in the match between Valencia and Barcelona after Chelsea's recent experiences. This time, though, it was Barca's turn to be on the receiving end as their Spanish rivals dished out a 4-1 hammering to leave them on the verge of their first ever European Cup final. Well, after the razzmatazz of the Challenge Cup final over the weekend, it was back to Super League business for the Leeds Rhinos, and the Yorkshire club finally found some form after a miserable campaign, beating Salford City Reds 42-16. And in the Yorkshire derby at the Shea, Castleford Tigers edged out a plucky Halifax side 20-14. On to the 15-man code and a high-profile arrival to these shores. The French international Thomas Castagnier has signed for the Premiership side Saracens. The Castres player has been capped 35 times and was part of the French team that lost to Australia in the Rugby World Cup final. And he feels that the chance to play in England for Saracens has much to recommend it.
The Saris last year, when they contacted me, they made me a really good impression because it seems to be a very family team and with family spirit. So, I need to feel well in my head to be good on the ground. I think it's more, the English, are more strict. They don't think the same way as we think, and they're more physic. So I think it will be good for me to improve that.
And that's all the sport for now.
Simon, thank you. The head of the Phoenix Consortium, the group that wants to keep mass car production at Rover's Longbridge plant, saving thousands of jobs in the process, has described the talks with BMW as very positive. The discussions are expected to last several days, and they're mainly about money.
BBC Television.
How did it go today, sir? Finally, the man to rescue Rover went public after weeks with no information. John Towers tonight has all the facts after the first full day negotiating with BMW.
We've managed to identify the very few remaining items that our teams are going to have to work on for the rest of this week. And it's all going in the right direction. Thanks very much.
BMW set a deadline for the end of May. Echoed from BMW headquarters tonight. Optimistic was the word there, but some way to go yet. Who picks up redundancy bills to be sorted out? Meanwhile, the man who walked away from a deal with BMW on Friday, John Moulton, who fronts the rival Alchemy bid, said his door remained open. But Longbridge is still in the balance. 2 bids for it then on BMW's table. If both fail, Longbridge closes.
We just haven't got a clue what's going on. I mean, business as usual, as far as we know. Still building cars.
Well, whether it be Alchemy or Phoenix, as long as this company keeps alive, that's all that matters to me.
The crucial action will be in this nondescript office in the City of London over the coming days and weeks, where the Phoenix people pore over the legal clauses and the accountancy, trying to convince their banks and BMW that they can make money running Rover.
On Friday, when Alchemy pulled out, the most likely option seemed to be the complete closure of Rover. Now, with 2 bidders back in the competition, that seems an unlikely option. The salvation of Rover now seems a possibility. Stephen Evans, BBC News, the City of London.
The relatives of a man who died after a struggle with prison officers are going to the High Court today to challenge the decision not to prosecute any of the officers involved. An inquest jury unanimously found that Alton Manning had been unlawfully killed, but the Director of Public Prosecutions said there was insufficient evidence to bring any criminal charges.
It was at Blakenhurst, a privately run prison near Redditch, that Alton Manning died 4.5 years ago. He'd been involved in a struggle with 6 or 7 prison officers. An inquest heard that Mr. Manning, a remand prisoner, died of asphyxia after being held in a dangerous neck hold. His family were jubilant when the jury unanimously found that he'd been unlawfully killed. But despite that verdict, no prison officer has been prosecuted over the death. The Director of Public Prosecutions, David Calvert-Smith, said there was insufficient evidence to bring criminal charges. His decision and a complaint that he failed to explain his reasons adequately are being challenged today. It's the first time the High Court has been asked to scrutinise the handling of a death in custody since the publication last year of a critical report on the subject. The report, by a retired judge, exposed fundamental flaws in the prosecution's decision-making process. The Crown Prosecution Service introduced new rules to counter the criticism. Today's case will establish how far it's moved on. Jane Peel, BBC News.
A sickening racist attack. That's how police have described an assault in which a black man was set on fire by 3 white men. Police in Birmingham say the 24-year-old victim was sprayed in the face with flammable liquid and then set alight.
The victim, a 24-year-old black man, was attacked on one of Birmingham's busiest roads. In the early hours of Monday morning, a group of men passing in a car shouted racist abuse. They then got out, sprayed the victim with a flammable liquid and set fire to him.
We are treating it as a racist attack simply because just prior to the liquid being sprayed in the victim's face, he was racially abused. And then he was set on fire with this liquid that we do not know what it contains.
The police are this evening studying closed-circuit television footage of the road. A team of officers has been in the area all day. An independent group which monitors racial attacks in Birmingham say they are concerned.
I'm just horrified that things like this can happen. And it's getting out of proportion.
This case comes just weeks after athlete Asha Hansen's white boyfriend was stabbed by racists outside her Birmingham home. The police say that serious racial crime is still relatively rare, but those who've been a victim say racism is constant.
You could go on forever, people shouting and the same people that you've helped and done things for standing out your door. You get to this stage where you just think, I'll rise above this. You've obviously got the problem, I haven't.
This evening, the victim of this weekend's attack, who's asked not to be named, has been released from hospital after treatment for burns. The police now have 25 officers trying to catch the people who attacked him. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Birmingham.
The veteran DJ Alan Fluff Freeman has been honoured with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the radio industry's biggest annual awards ceremony. Freeman, a radio institution who's entertained UK pop pickers for 4 decades, was handed the prize at the Sony Radio Awards in London in front of top broadcasting figures.
It was the biggest night radio's ever had. The stars of the wireless were joined by a galaxy of others, but all of them were eclipsed by the man who was possibly the first radio star, Alan Fluff Freeman. His legendary status was confirmed as everyone got to their feet, and Fluff treated them to some of his best-known phrases.
Good evening, pop pickers. It was about 3 weeks ago that Chris Tarrant and I met, and he said, you know, Fluff, he said, you're quite remarkable. He said, for the last 40 years, all you ever bloody well said is, all right, stay bright, not off.
It was a good night as well for local radio. In some of the most important categories, the big names and national stations lost out to their local rivals. Zoe Ball's breakfast show on Radio 1 lost to London's Kiss 100. And in the news and talk breakfast category, radios 4 and 5 were pipped at the post by one of the BBC's smallest stations, Radio Foyle, which broadcasts in Northern Ireland. Both Kiss 100 and Radio Foyle went on to win Station of the Year in their respective audience size categories. But the night's two big awards, National Station of the Year and the Gold Award, went to Classic FM.
A bigger and better ceremony, more nominees than ever before, and 1,000 entries just go to show how much radio has grown in recent years. And the awards categories have changed yet again this year, reflecting the growth of diversity in radio, which can only increase as new digital technology offers up more frequencies. And this event will become even bigger. Nikki Alvin, BBC News, at the Sony Radio Awards.
That's all for me for this morning, but just before I go, David and Jane take over in a few minutes, a quick look at some of the front pages of the papers. There is only one picture for all of them today, the remains of the Learjet in which David Coulthard, the racing driver, and his fiancée survived. Miracle, says The Sun, and yes, the Mirror, miracle, exactly the same headline, the same picture. And the Daily Express, David Coulthard climbed out of this unscathed. A dramatic picture on all of the tabloids. The Independent too has it, along with their splash story. The PM asks families to name the May Day rioters who brought such chaos to central London on May Day. The Times as well. Coulthard survives air crash in France, the same picture there. And on The Guardian as well. It's the one big picture that all the picture desks have gone for. That's all from me for this morning. Time, though, before I go, for another quick look at the latest weather headlines with Carol Kirkwood. Carol.
Hello again. Well, yesterday Wales saw the top temperature with 21 degrees Celsius, that's 70 Fahrenheit. But by contrast, out to the east, we had a bit more clouds. So Manston, for example, only saw 9. Now, high pressure is still in charge of our weather today. And indeed, we're still pulling in northeasterly winds from the North Sea. So we're again going to see a fair amount of cloud in many eastern parts of the country. So west is best, and that really holds true as we push into Thursday. And by Friday, we've got a frontal system not too far away from our southern shores. So it does mean we're likely to see some showers here as well. But as we head towards the dawn period, we've got a lot of cloud around. Some breaks in the cloud, allowing the temperature to dip to between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius. But at least it means later on in the day, this is where we'll see a nice bright start. So some glorious sunshine if you live in some southern parts of Wales, or indeed